Hey everyone, how's it going? Forrest here, again with another installment of my complete analysis of all of J.S. Bach's chorale harmonizations. So we have kind of an interesting chorale today. As you can see, it doesn't look like the usual chorale where all the voices are pretty much active at every time in the entirety of the movement. Instead, we have one with a little bit of arrangement. There are some rests, some really long ties. This chorale exists in a space between some of Bach's chorus music and a chorale because it does have somewhat of a regular harmonic rhythm. But when we get into this section right here where there's imitation between the voices, the harmonic rhythm becomes very difficult to discern, and the analysis as a result of that becomes really challenging as well. But we're going to try and work our way through it. The first part of the chorale is pretty straightforward, so we'll quickly go through that first. But the chorale that we're looking at today is Meine Ziel erbet den Herrn, which translates to My soul doth magnify the Lord. We're in the key of B flat to start things off. There might be an argument to suggest that we're in the key of G minor to start things off, but the melody sounds very much like B flat, and that imposes a bias on the way that I hear it, even though Bach tries to force a perspective on the harmony. But it works out in B flat when you analyze it that way too. So we start off with a G minor triad, G, B flat, G, and D, which is a 6 chord in the key of B flat. We then have A, C, F, and F. That is an F major triad in first inversion, which is 5-6, our dominant. And then we have B flat, D, F, and D. That is our tonic triad in root position. We then have A, C, F sharp, and D. That's D7 over A, which is 5-4-3. 6, as D is the dominant of G and G is our submediant in the key of B flat major. And then we have G, B flat, G, and D. The chord does in fact go to 6 like we expect it to, so everything's working so far. We then have F sharp, A, and D. So we have another D major chord again, which is kind of why it sounds like G minor through this section, especially with the dominant pedal in the soprano. The fact that repeats there really does hint at the idea of G minor, but it still sounds like D major to me when contextualized in the whole harmony, or in the whole, just the whole phrase. If you hear this one section as G minor, maybe you can deviate and say this little phrase is G minor, and then we go back to B flat by the time we cadence, because we do end the phrase with a perfect authentic cadence in the key of B flat. But we have another 5-6 of 6 chord here, and then that goes where we expect it to, or does it? G, B flat, G, and E flat. So we get the makings of a G minor triad, but the E flat in the melody throws us for a loop, and we get a deceptive progression. We go to 4-6, so they both share a bass. The leading tone goes where it's expected to, but the melody doesn't go where it expects us to, or we expect it to. If it held this D over, we would be in good shape, but here we have E flat, this really beautiful deceptive progression. Saying 5-6 of 6 going to 4 is a roundabout way of saying 5 going to 6 if we were thinking in terms of G minor. So this is a very textbook deceptive progression. I just hear it in B flat rather than G minor. Here we have A, C, F, and E flat. That's an F7 chord over A, so that would be 5-6-5, followed by B, C, F, and D, or B flat rather. So this C, I'm going to put parentheses here for the C that we would be hearing, because we could hear this as 2 quarter notes tied together, so it's really the accented non-chord tones it's happening on the beat. but I think a 1 is being implied here, but we have a suspension that doesn't resolve until the next beat. Another very beautiful moment. We have G, B flat, G, and D. And this oscillation between 1 and 6 is also kind of hinting probably at the idea of modality, the fact that there's just such a fluidity between major and minor instead of the definition between the two of them. I think that's indicative of the fact that Bach is thinking with some modal faculties. But all in all, it's interesting that the B flat, it's also just a byproduct of the fact that there's counterpoint going on. You know, the inner voices have the syncopated rhythm, and then the bass and the soprano are they're rhythmically independent of one another. So, yeah, it's kind of hard to analyze. He's definitely implying 1 here, that's for sure, right? We get B flat, D, and F, but here we get G, B flat, G, and D. The fact that the B flat resolves down, but the suspension is interrupted. It's not even really a suspension because it would be well, actually, no, it kind of is. We have it would be like a 9/8 suspension, but it gets interrupted by the bass changing, and it completely changes the quality of the chord. All right, so getting ready for the cadence, we have E flat, B flat, G, and C, switching between soprano and bass clef. If you've watched any of my videos in the past, you know that I get jumbled up, but I try to correct myself quickly. That would be a C minor 7 chord over E flat. You know, Bach loves his 2-6-5 chords. And then we get the C in the bass here, but we get an incomplete triad as a result of that. C, B flat, G, and C. So the fact that there's no E flat in this triad anymore, or it's not even really a triad anymore, there's no E flat in this chord, but we can change the figured bass to reflect what's happening structurally. It is in root position and it does have a 7th, so 7/5 is an appropriate figure bass for this, or 8/7/5, but I just write shorthand 7/5. Okay, then we have F, A, F, and C. That is an F major triad, which is our dominant in root position, just a 5 chord. And then we cadence on B flat, D, F, and B flat, our tonic triad. Okay, looking ahead to the next cadence, we have a perfect authentic cadence in the key of G minor. So we have another B flat triad here, B flat, F, and D. And then we have another one here where there's some, he just changes the voices that are doubled. We double we have 1 D in the chord here, and then we actually get rid of the D and just double up on the F, and we get this open 5th here, which is interesting, but still 1 is being implied. We then have F, A, F, and C, which is a root position F major triad, which is our 5 chord. And then we have A, C, F, and C, which just takes that F major triad and inverts it 1 time. He just rotates the chord so that the A is in the bass. All right, then we have C, G, E flat, and C. Now in the key of B flat major, that's a 2 chord, which is kind of interesting to see 5 go to 2. But in the key of G minor, it is a 4 chord. And I think this is where we modulate. Then we have E flat, C, G, and G, which is just an inversion of the chord as well. So we have this theme of, really, it kind of has a half note harmonic rhythm, because when you invert the chord, you're really not changing the chord's quality. It can sound different when you invert a chord, especially when you start inverting 7th chords. They start to sound distinct, but with inverted triads, they tend to hold their quality even when you invert them from a sounding perspective. So the fact that he goes from 1 inverted chord, 1 chord inversion, another chord inversion, I think the harmonic rhythm's slowing down here, and it's also spelling out what's going to happen later on in the chorale, because the harmonic rhythm really slows down as far as what chords you can discern. All right, then we have D, D, G, and B flat. It's a G minor triad and 2nd inversion, so 1, 6, 4. We have a C here, so that would be C, D, G, and B flat, which isn't really a spellable tertian chord, at least not with Bach's vocabulary, So I think this is, the fact that the harmonic rhythm slowed down. So instead of getting a chord tone, we get a non-chord tone, a neighbor tone that happens on a strong beat. Also makes me suspect that this chorale was actually quite a bit faster. If the chorale was faster, maybe that would justify the slowing down of the harmonic rhythm. But here we get D, D, F sharp, and A, which is a root position, D major triad, which is our dominant, which turns into 7 here, or I guess we could call it a passing tone, depending on how you look at it. But here we have this link between 1, 6, 4, and 5. I'll use the bracket notation, and then we cadence on G minor, G, B flat, D, and G. All right, moving ahead, we have another perfect authentic cadence in the key of B flat major, and there is definitely some commonality between the first phrase and this phrase, the third phrase, so let's take a look for some similarities between the two of them. We have G, B flat, G, and D, which is a tonic triad in the key of G minor, but I think because there's a similarity between these two phrases, I think we can go ahead and just say we're in the key of B flat major again and call this 6. Then we have F, C, A, and F. So similarly, we're going to a 5 chord. Just in this case, it's not inverted. It's in root position. B flat, D, F, and D. There's our tonic triad in root position. We then have C, C, F, and D. And this chord right here, I don't really know what's going on. We have 2 C's, which I suspect both of them just to be neighbor tones. And this D is just a pedal. But I really do think it's this B flat, this F, and this D that are holding it down, and these C's are just neighbor tones. So all in all, I think the 1 chord is still being implied here. You might be able to force a perspective and say this is like a passing 5 chord because we have the F and we have the C's. But I think that's kind of a hard argument because it's missing the 3rd. The D isn't really contributing all that much. That's just my 2 cents about it. So I think this is just a big 1 chord that happens over 3 beats. Let me know if you have any different analysis for that downbeat. That's kind of interesting what's going on. We then have A, D, F sharp, and D. That is a D major triad in 2nd inversion. So that'd be a 5, 6, 4. Interesting that we're seeing a 6, 4 chord used this way. 5, 6, 4 of 6. It's not the first time we've seen 5 of 6, right? We've seen 2nd inversion 5 chords, just only 5, 7 chords, not root position. If this continued down to G, we would be in good shape, but he leaps up to D, really deceiving us in terms of how we're going to hear this resolution, because we expect it to go to 6, but again, similarly to how we have this progression here, 5, 6 of 6 going to 4, we go to D, D, G, and E flat. So we have an incomplete E flat major 7 chord here, which is a 4, 7 chord in 3rd inversion. So that would be 4, 4, 2. So another deceptive progression going on. And that goes to C, C, A, and E flat, which is an A diminished triad, which is exactly where 4 wants to go. 4 wants to go to 7, more specifically 7, 6. And then we get B flat, F, B flat, and D, which is our tonic triad. 4, 7, 1 is a very normal progression. And then we get D, F, B flat, and D. So the chord just inverts. Very similar to the... actually, this might be the first time we're seeing this. This is not... Oh, no. We saw this here where we took a chord and then instead of going up a 3rd, we descended a 6th. So we've seen this progression or this movement before in the bass. But we're getting ready for the cadence, so we're looking for chords that would imply like some type of cadential formula. Here we have E flat, G, B flat, and C. Bach loves his 2, 6, 5 chords. That's C minor 7 over E flat. And then we have C, G, B flat, and C, identical to the cadence that we have going on in the first phrase. So a little bit of 7-5 action going on there. But to switch things up, we get a little bit more movement in the inner voices. We get F, F, B flat, and C. So really we do just have a big 5 chord here, but this B flat is a suspension over the bass. It's a 4/3 suspension. And then we get a doubling of the C in the tenor before we cadence on B flat, D, F, and B flat, which is our tonic triad. So we have very similar cadences here, but he injects a suspension in this one, but they're very similar to one another. So phrase 1 would probably be A. This would be like A, maybe even another just iteration of A, maybe A prime if you are particular about the harmony, but I'd say they're pretty much identical to one another for all intents and purposes. All right, now we're getting into this lengthy phrase at the end. The interesting thing about this phrase is that we have imitation going on in the lower voices, so he keeps the same melodic ideas from the second phrase, right? We have D going up to F, and then C, 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 but then it varies a little bit before we get to the end. We have this really long cadential figure. I suspect that the melody just ends B flat, A, G, but then he includes this section right here at the end of the chorale. As I suspect, actually, this is probably the last movement in the cantata, so there's probably like a little bit more of like a fanfare-ish section with more harmonic development going on. But really, this is a contrapuntal section, and I think although sometimes chords do emerge from the texture, there's a lot more just intervallic movement going on in between the voices, so there's going to be kind of a sparse analysis here in comparison to what I usually analyze. So just taking a look here, we have B flat and D to start things off. I think that that's still just an implication of the one chord, right? We have B flat and D, that's the root and the third of the triad. And then this C right here, I don't think a new chord's being implied. I think he's just starting off some imitation in the voices, in the lower voices here. We have just a passing tone. And here we have D, F, and F. Now, you might hear this as a 3 chord. You might even hear this as a 1/6 chord, because really we still have the idea of B flat in our ears. However, I really don't know exactly whether or not a new chord's being implied here. It doesn't sound like it to me. I still hear, I hear a little bit of D minor here when I listen to the chorale, but all in all, I really do think this is more of like a big implication of B flat major, because D, F, and F are both notes in B flat. We're just missing the root. But then we have, I think, 2 more passing tones, right? Because E flat, G, and F, that's just a cluster, right? That's just a series of steps. So it's not very analyzable using Bach's harmonic vocabulary. So we'll just call those passing tones. And I'm really just looking at this kind of like like free counterpoint. So here we have F, A, F, and C. That's very clearly a 5 chord. But regardless of that, I think that really that's kind of what's going on, was we just have like a big 5 chord going on. And in the same way that we have the 1 and the 3 highlighted here, we have the 1 and the 5 holding it down the entire time. So the fact that we get, B flat and G, those are just passing tones. And the fact that they're happening on beats 2 and 4 are also reinforcing this analysis, right? Because we have regular harmonic, we have, a harmonic rhythm that occurs on the strong beat, and then we have intervals and counterpoint happening for the rest of the measure. Okay, so with this 5 chord, I think it continues pretty much for the entirety of the phrase. We have C, A, and C here with the F in the bass, so the 5 just gets restated on 3. But then we get G, C, B flat, and C. And this is not the first time we've seen this chord. We've actually seen it here. So C, G, B flat, and C. So you might, in this section, hear like a 2 chord of sorts, even though it's the G and the bass. We have the G, the C, and the B flat, which would be like a 2-4-3 chord, kind of, sorta. You might hear that there. And this isn't the first time we've seen 5 going to 2 either. We've seen 5 going to 2. And in fact, 5 going to 2 is where he modulates in the second phrase from B flat to G. So maybe this introduction of G right here might be our modulation point to G minor. I also haven't mentioned the last cadence yet because I'm actually not certain what kind of cadence it is. I have ideas about 2 possibilities regarding what it could be, but I honestly don't know. I think it's a toss-up. It's close between the 2. So we can call this a C minor 7 chord, even though we're missing the E flat. The fact that we're missing a lot of thirds here is also indicative of the fact that we're listening to some type of transitional work. There's it's not 100% tonal yet. It's 90-95% there, but the fact that Bach is writing counterpoint where thirds are omitted in the chord, kind of indicative of an older style, because in the Renaissance this is a weird mixture of worlds actually, because you didn't hear a lot of sevenths in Renaissance music in the middle of the phrase. You'd hear sometimes a half cadence where you'd cadence on a 5-7 chord. You might hear a seventh in the counterpoint as you're getting ready to cadence on the tonic or the final of the mode. You'll hear 7/6 suspensions, but never really in a pronounced fashion. But granted, this is somewhat homorythmic, as it has a regular pulse. Even though there is counterpoint going on, it really is the bridging of 2 worlds, which is really interesting. So we can go ahead and call this 4/3 in the key of G minor. And then we get A, and then this is really weird to me, A, C, C, and C. Now, that looks like an A diminished triad, but we're missing the third, so this very easily could be a continuation of the 5 chord in the same way that here we only have the 3 chord going on, right? We call it, you might hear 3 here. It's you might hear 7 here. You might hear 2 here, actually. Yeah, you might hear 2 here. You might hear 7 here as well, but I'm not 100% certain. I really do think he's just writing counterpoint that has consonants in the key that we're in, right? A and C, that's a third. He's tripling the C in the voices, and whatever way you spell it, C can't be the root of the chord unless Bach's writing some type of 13 chord with the 13 in the bass, and I don't think that that's what Bach's doing. It's an A triad with no third, or no root. I don't know which one it is. So you might hear 2, you might hear 7, I don't know. But then we get B flat, D, C, and C. And those are just passing tones again, or at least what I suspect to be passing tones, as we have this figure of just stepwise motion going up, imitated in between the tenor and the bass particularly, but that imitation gets broken in this measure here. Or at least he continues the idea in the bass, and then it doesn't ever get restated in the upper 2 voices. But here we have C, E, C, and G. So that's a C major triad, and in the key of G minor, that is a 4 chord in root position. But this might be kind of an interesting chord that might be a little bit more nuanced moving forward. Actually, the more that I think about it, no, I think that is just a 4 chord, because this is just a melodic minor fragment. But you'll see the idea of C becoming more prevalent as the B naturals get introduced. But then we have F sharp, A, and C. We have a 7/6/4 chord here, like so. And I don't know if it's more appropriate for me to you know what, I am going to do that, because the harmonic rhythm is clearly slowed down. I'm going to mark these as passing tones and just say this is a passing 7 chord, because the harmonic rhythm is clearly much slower than it was in the first phrase and the second phrase, basically in the first half and a little bit of the chorale. So this is definitely a passing 6/4 chord, or 7 chord. And the fact that it's a 6/4 chord and we leap down a ninth is really interesting as well. Bach has not been treating 6/4 chords like the way we're expecting to hear them, or the way that we expect them to function or move in the based on the textbook's generalization. Even though Bach has, for the most part, used 6/4 chords in an expected fashion. So here we have B flat, G, D, and B flat. So here we have a 4-7-1 progression, even though he's leaping down a ninth instead of going down a second. That's very interesting. Bach does all sorts of wacky things with the bass, just having them jump all over the place. And then we have a passing tone here, C, G, D, and B flat. That's not the first time we've seen that combination, but this is more so a byproduct of a counterpoint. This is really just a passing tone. Then we have D, F, B flat, and A. So here we have another example of a 1 chord going to a 3 chord. This is B flat major 7, which would be 3, 6, 5, because it has the D in the bass. Kind of like how we have 1 going to 3 here. And it's also B flat going to D, right? Kind of a restatement of the exact same bass idea here. That's pretty cool. But here we're in the key of G minor rather than being in the key of B flat major. It's still 1 to 3 though, so maybe there was some intention behind that. And then here we have some more passing tones. And I'm calling them passing tones just because of the fact that, the harmonic rhythm has slowed down, and really we're getting chords on 1 and 3, and anything that happens on 2 and 4 based on our analyses earlier. I just want to stay consistent, basically. 2 and 4 have been analytically slower. So, the fact that it happens on 4, it's kind of like a mixture of... I actually don't know where I was going with that. The harmonic rhythm slowed down. That's basically what I was just trying to get across. We have E flat, C, and A. So we have another A diminished chord. This would be a 2-6-4 chord, but this time it's being used in a passing context, so that's fine. So we have a passing 2-6-4 chord, which is A diminished over E flat. And then we have... This is good actually, because we go to actually never mind, we don't go where we expect it to. We would expect 2 diminished, right, to go to 5. However, we get F natural in the bass. Then we would expect this E flat maybe to go to F, or E natural to go to F sharp, something like that. That's why we don't really see the E flat in the bass so much. We see the C in the bass more often because that goes to D. But the E flat, actually the E flat could go down to D. But no, he goes up to F natural here, where we have F natural, D, B, and G. And in this chord is actually very interesting. We have a G7 chord over F, so we have another 4-2 chord, just like how we had 4-4-2 here. This would be 5-4-2 of 4, as we would expect C minor to follow G7, which G7 is the dominant of it. And then we have some voice rotation here. B turns into D and D turns into B. And then we get E flat, C, G, and G. That's just a C minor triad in first inversion. Alright, then we have D, D, F, and G. With no B in the mix, I think it's kind of hard to call this a dominant. This wouldn't be the first chord. You might hear it as 5 of what would you hear this as? It's like, you might just hear this as 5 of 4. The way that I learned how to do analysis when there's a pedal tone was typically over the bass, but we have a pedal in the melody. So when you're analyzing with a pedal, typically you don't take inversions into account, because that would the pedal already confuses the analysis for chords that the pedal isn't a chord tone of. So you just stay consistent in analyzing the rest of the voices over the pedal. So you might hear this as 5 of 4, and that should be a lowercase 4. My apologies. It might even be too small for you to read, but if you full screen the video, you could probably make it out. But then we get C, D, E flat, and G, and this as D is obviously a non-chord tone, and he's really just implying another 4 chord in root position. We have a passing tone in the bass, and then he leaps down to G. We kind of get D, G, and E flat, and an E flat chord would be like 6, but this would be like another one of these E flat chords where the D is in the bass. I really do think this is just a passing tone, and this is just counterpoint, and we have some suspensions going on. Here we have E flat, C, E flat, and G, which is another C minor triad, but this time it's in first inversion. And then we get a F here, but notice how we don't have E natural and F sharp. Instead we have E flat and F natural. So we have some minor mode stuff going on here, because we would definitely, in anticipation for the cadence, expect leading tone, but we don't get it. We get B natural, and I'll talk about that when we get to the cadence, which we're almost there. We have G, C, E flat, and G, and this would be a 6/4 chord. We've seen this cadential formula before, where we see the 4 chord inverted all the way up to, or we see a chord inverted all the way up from root to second inversion, and then we see a cadence. I can't remember if it was a half cadence or if it was a plagal cadence, but it was one or the other, and I intuit that it was a plagal cadence. But on this beat here we have G, B natural, D, and G, and that would be our 1 chord in root position. And then we get some neighbor tones here, A and C, before we cadence on 1 again. So if we look at this cadence, we have something really interesting going on. If we're analyzing this in the key of G minor, that would make this final cadence a plagal cadence. And this isn't the first time we've ended a chorale on a plagal cadence, I believe. I remember having it been done once before and talking about it at length. But I think there's, the first time I listened to this cadence, I heard it end as a half cadence. But I think that it definitely blurs the line between whether or not we're in the key of G minor or if we're in the key of C. I think that there's an argument to be made that this could also be a half cadence. And if we go ahead and backtrack all the way to the 4th to last measure and analyze it in the key of C minor, we have 5/4-2, 1/6, maybe a little bit of a 5 going on here. Then we have 1 in root position. Then we have 1/6, 1/6-4, and then 5. And then we would cadence on 5. So when you compare these two analyses, the one in C minor looks a lot better. It looks like something that would at least be more typical. 1/6-4 going to 5 and then cadencing on the 5 is a little bit more normal in my mind. And I think that, when you compare the two, the C minor analysis looks better. That doesn't always mean anything musically. Like, the analysis might look more what you expect it to on the page, but it still very well might be in a different key. All in all, when you have this long G pedal in the melody, it might be kind of hard to argue that we're in the key of C, because we never really get a very clear cadence in the key of C. It's just with all these B naturals here, it's hard to not hear C. But all in all, this is a very strange cadence. I don't know exactly what's going on. To me, I intuit that it's a plagal cadence because he's just, and the B naturals are kind of just prolonging the idea of the Picardy third. Like I said, it's very possible that the melody ended here on this beat on the 4th to last measure, and then that's where we get the first B natural. So if we redacted the rest of the chorale and just saw the fact that we ended on a G chord, we could have just said the chorale ended there. Boom. That's just a Picardy third. But he continues the B natural throughout, which kind of breathes new light into the chorale and makes the argument that we are in the key of C, or at least proposes the idea. But all in all, what a really bizarre chorale. It is more of a chorale than it isn't. But when you have the counterpoint in this section, it kind of veers away from the reason why I started analyzing the chorales in the first place. And my first intention was picking the chorales because of the fact that they had regular harmonic rhythm, and this chorale is definitely not abiding by those expectations that I had. It was still fascinating to analyze. Definitely the stronger bits of analysis take place in the first 2/3 of the chorale. This last little bit right here really is just me trying to impose a tonal analysis on top of counterpoint, which is somewhat difficult to do. Like if you analyze instrumental music, you'll find that a lot of the times there are chords that are implied, or large swaths of a work where a chord is generally mentioned, but you'll see a lot of passing tones, you'll see a lot of ornaments that make it difficult to pick apart harmony with the level of granularity that you can in a chorale. So that being said, I'll leave you on that bit of insight. Thank you so much for watching the video, and thank you for continuing to support the channel. You know, I check out my YouTube studio, the Creator Studio, every couple of days, and I woke up this morning to 23 subscribers. That's that's wild. You know, this was just a video. This channel was meant to be like a little archive for my own analytical purposes, and the fact that people are actually enjoying the content and subscribing to the channel, it makes me so happy. I'm looking forward to seeing the channel grow, and it's going to be super cool. We're actually closing in on episode 100 too. I know how time flies, it's crazy. There's so much more analysis to do, but the fact that I'm almost like a quarter of the way there, it's actually pretty crazy to think about. This has definitely become like a daily ritual for me, and I look forward to my video recording whenever I do. Even when I get home from work late, or if I'm out with my friends or out with family and I get home at like midnight and I'm like, oh no, I didn't make my video, I still enjoy sitting down the wee hours of the morning and analyzing. It's really nice. It's very therapeutic for me, and it's definitely keeping my chops sharp, which I really love analysis, and that's why I'm doing these videos. So that being said, thank you again, everyone. I'm looking forward to tomorrow's analysis, and I hope you take care.